I was also doing the Forge booth at Gen Con, which was a community booth where you could come and be the loophole in Gen Con was that you could get an exhibitor badge for somebody's booth for a nominal amount of money. And I said, I'll get a booth and you can pay me for the exhibitor's badge. And then you can bring your independent game and it will be featured at the booth. And you'd be at the booth with us. And it was extremely successful. Now, partly it was successful because it was such an insanely good deal. I even, finally grew a few brain cells and said, oh, and you have to give me a little more money too. Right? Just because, this is insane. But still, even with the extra money, it was it was way cheaper, as it turned out, than just going to Gen Con. And, and that itself was a phenomenon. It spawned it spawned spontaneous play. We even took over the whole area of one of the local hotels every night and just created an after-hours convention of play. In 2003, Vincent Baker and I were standing on the balcony of that hotel, and it was an internal balcony, so we were looking down, and we saw all those tables unused, late at night. And we saw all those tables and this huge, beautiful space. And we saw the bar and the bartender just hanging out. And Vincent and I looked at each other and said, we need to use this. And it was called the Embassy Suites. And for years, the Embassy Suites after hours play was just a huge thing. In fact, it was like another internet. And so between the Forge booth and then the after hours play and the people posting about those things and bringing their games, this is how Primetime Adventures got built. Matt Wilson shows up with 5 pages to one of the after hours play groups. And these phenomena were extremely powerful. I actually saw them occur in pieces. And yet, at the same time, it created, and this is something I was against, it created status games about who was a publisher and who wasn't. Which is terrible because the whole point was that it was easy now. That's
we had exactly the same issues.
That's and this Italy in particular has really suffered from this. There's a horrible debate that just goes on and on and on about what is a real publisher.
We didn't have that much of. We had some of this status game, as you described, on who's publishing and who's not. But we had other dynamics. So we were deeply influenced by what you said regarding grounding your reflection in what your.
I think Christoph saw the transition I'm talking about. So
and he really because he was the bridge between you and us. I didn't read much of. I read a lot of theory, but I wasn't on the Forge. So, and he brought a lot of your reflections to us, and which was very, very beneficial for.
I appreciate
for us.
It. Thank you.
And for instance,
maybe all that blood on the ground was worth it.
Which doesn't mean that we also had our battles, but they were of a different kind because it's a smaller world.
Right.
The thing is, for instance, regarding the importance of having to ground your theoretical reflections, an important achievement, I think, of the community of podcasts in France. In France, we have a lot of podcasts, and in particular, the one I'm contributing to, which is La Cellule. So in English it would be The Cell, which is hosted by Romaric Briand, who's also he has produced a lot of games, of theories, and so on. But a lot of his work was work on communication, building legitimacy, and in particular, one of the important formats we have, because it's fortunately still running, were one shots. So in which we describe a game. So microphones are cut, and after that we come back and the podcast is basically the debriefing, the presentation and debriefing of the game, and what kind of theoretical use you can make of the game.
And now what do we think? Right.
Yeah.
There is a group that I don't mean to interrupt, but there's a group right now which is doing this in a very almost deceptively casual way. There's a Canadian-born guy who is either expatriated or just permanently resident in South Korea, who has a very popular YouTube channel and has a nice way of talking. He's got a great presentation. And he plays with people by screen mostly, and they record the session. The person who's organizing that particular session, the game master for many games, also records his thoughts before they play and talks about preparing for the session and what they did to prepare and what they thought. So he's made that recording already, but he hasn't shared it with anybody. They play, and so that's recorded. And then each person does a solo recording of their reflections of play without talking to each other. I kind of like this, actually. I like the sort of non-fabricated response, right? And so they each have their reflections. And then after that, they, of course, are all commenting on each other's videos. And so you end up... And then the GM releases the prep one at some point in all this. And then they... and of course, as you can imagine, then the craziness begins and they start making more videos, but so any given session is a pretty extensive chunk of recorded time. And it's almost overwhelming. I mean, they're playing one of my games right now, and I'm like, wait, I got 20 hours of footage to watch for every fucking session, my God. But of course I'm impressed and flattered and all the rest of it. They do this with tons of games. They also have rotating game masters for game master-based games. That's an interesting question. I actually wonder if the learning curve to really appreciate the game keeps stopping, instead of actually building. But but that's a minor point. Anyway, but that's an example of some of the extent to which people will go. So you have something like that going on with the podcasting and reflections and discussion.
Yeah. But it's a bit different because, for instance, an important idea of Romaric was to not record the session itself. That's very important because it's otherwise it could hinder the kind of authenticity.
You think a performance dynamic would begin, right?
Which is something that personally I hate. I'm praying for myself and the friends around the table, not for an external audience. Doesn't mean that I won't comment on what happened to me, but I'm playing.
It is a concern, and one thing I've found, because I had never played by screen or recorded play before moving to Sweden, and I only started playing by screen out of desperation. Now, what's interested me, as usual, I think infrastructurally. And I think, what is the actual technology that we're using? How are we approaching the technology? And so when I play, it looks just like you and me right here.
Yeah.
I see for one thing, I've noticed we all live in the same room, all the gamers.
with books behind.
It's a clearly we're just. I mean, this is all a big fake. We all actually live in the same house, and we just pretend we live in different countries. And so we're doing this, and we're showing it. Mm-hmm. We're actually, to a small extent, and I know some people are careful about this. They don't have like really personal items behind them and stuff, which is fine. Whenever somebody's kid comes in, I make sure and clip that out. We don't want kids, in YouTube videos and stuff.
Exactly.
All those things. But I will say that level of intimacy does seem to help. And a number of people that I've played with and recorded, either by screen or in person, at first they're like, well, I'm not so sure about this. And then afterward, they'll say, I totally forgot all about it. Forget it. It's fine. And I think that that's been the case more often than not. There have been a couple of people who said, I don't want to be recorded, but we tried it. I didn't like it. No more recording. And that's fine. Yeah. But that's been vanishingly small. And
also,
well, the argument is that what if this is unconscious? What if you're just behaving differently? Sure. Because, well, I don't know. We can. There's always going to be a personal assessment for that, and I think that considering all the casual table talk and the way people interact, I've generally found it. I think. I mean, stereotypically.
Sure.
Swedes consider themselves to be very self-conscious.
Okay.
Right. There's a sense of, self-moderate, self-regulate is a big thing that they perceive themselves to do. If the play that I've recorded and experienced with them is any indication, it's not a real. It's not a valid stereotype. It's pretty unbridled, pretty uninhibited. So, so I guess I'm feeling that I hear what you're saying, and I'm not going to say it's a bad policy or criticize it, but at least as far as this one person's utterly social primate assessment can go, I think that it's less of a fear for me than it was.
Sure.
It's almost gone. I mean, I set up the camera and everybody forgets the camera and we just play.
The thing also is that the podcast of La Cellule, so the one-shot podcast, also had I think, two specific intentions. And focusing on the discussion after would show first that the game we just played was fun and we had fun and we would explain why it was fun, because one of our battles would be to be as I said recognized, because France is French speaking
francophone
francophone is a rather small community, so we needed to show that we had fun with those weird games we had. So, because we needed to, in a way, convince also people who were more, how should I say that, in a traditional kind of games, So we had to show that what we were doing had meaning. So we couldn't, and we didn't want to remain in a small group of 4 or 5 people. We needed to explain why we had fun and how to play those weird games we had. That was, I think, the first intention. And the second intention is still to have reflection, so to be able to show that we could discuss love, we could discuss death, we could discuss any existential abstract thing that you may want. So, and that's. It was still fun. It didn't ruin the fun to think. Just to explain why I think Romaric's decision was right to focus on the discussion rather than on the game itself.